back? Would you get my back? Would you take my call when I start to crack? Would you rescue me? Would you rescue me? Would you rescue me when I'm by myself? When I need your love, if I need your help.
G'day everybody, my name's Kai, I'm the creator of Elixir Mods, and in today's tutorial I'm going to run you over how to create your very first item and object inside of Eco for modding. I excuse some of the cuts for today. I haven't been feeling too well, just a general cold flu, don't worry, it's all good. So we're going to create an item first, and then we're going to add a model, and then as a little bonus, I'm going to show you how to add references to other mod packs that may include little features similar to the Elixir Mods die pack, to allow you to use other items from other mods in your own mod, especially ones that have been built in DLLs. Because how Eco loads up mods is it loads up all the CS files first, and then it'll go through and load up the DLLs. So if you try to reference a DLL, and you're only using CS files, the server is going to have an error because it's not going to be able to find their items. So if you're going to be referencing another mod pack, then you will need to build in a DLL. So we're continuing on pretty much from the last tutorial where I showed you how to set up everything to get ready to mod in Eco. That was basically a setup just to get ready for this next step, which is really, really basic. I'm going to cover as many aspects as I can, mostly the relevant ones. But there will be a few cuts, just in case, like, if I'm not feeling too well. But all the edits and changes will all be done in the video. I won't be skipping ahead or anything like. I'll go through and I'll do it all properly. And show you how everything is done. Now, in the last video, we went up and we made our solution in Visual Studios for a .NET Standard class library. We called it MyMod. Now, I have made a few changes off screen just to start with. And we've changed our class name, like class1, to myfirstitem.cs. Now, it doesn't really matter what you name this file. It can be named the same as something else. It doesn't really matter at all. What matters is the code inside the file. And I've gone and changed our namespace to eco.mods.techtree because this will just add it into the whole techtree namespace area, which like most 90% of the mods are usually inside of. Some other modders may have theirs inside of a specific namespace or anything or something else, but just for a generic item and model, we're just going to use the general eco mods tech tree. Now, when it comes to adding references for our eco, so like our assemblies and stuff like that, there is a generic set that you can use for just making general items. And this is the set here. Now, you can put your usings outside of your namespace or inside of your namespace. It doesn't matter. It just depends on what you want to do. Now, if you're using Visual Studios, you'll see that these ones have all been grayed out, but this one hasn't. It just means that there's nothing actually referencing these namespaces, and it just doesn't believe that they need to be there because they're not being used, but we're going to end up using them. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is with our item is we need to serialize our item. Otherwise, it's going to cause issues with the server, and it's just not going to play nicely. The next thing is if you want your item to be able to be sold in a shop, we need to add the currency attribute, which comes under the economy. Now, if you're just making a normal item, you should be able to do the weight. I believe it's just an int. Yeah, it's just an int. So how the eco weight system works is a little strange. We're just gonna go with like, I don't know. We'll go with 500 for now. And that's not in kilos, so don't worry. Or if you don't want to use weight, you can use max stack size. Now this is the other handy thing about having this all done through Visual Studios as well. As you could see, when I was typing in my attribute name to start with. So let's say like see how I started typing in serialized? It shows up there, and if you just press tab, it will auto-complete and put that in if that's what you're looking for. So that can make our life a little bit easier. But if you don't want to set the weight, you can set the max stack size, so you can set it to something like 10 or 1 or 1,000 if you like. That is completely up to you. You can use the combination of weight and max stack size, but we're just going to use max stack size for today. So the next thing we need to do is we need to make a public partial class, and we're going to give our item its name. Now this is where it is really important. So we're just going to give this a name called my item. So this just helps us tell that it's an item. It's not actually necessary to have the second item there, but it just tells us that it's an item, colon, and we need to define it as an item. So now in 8.3 we used to be able to go public override display name. Now they've changed it in 9.0, so if you're coming across from 8.3 this might be helpful for you. So they've got a new attribute called lock display name, and it's just a string. So we're just going to put it in what its name is. So it's called my item. So that's what it's going to be. That's all, like when you do your /give item inside of eco, that's the name that it'll use to give it to you. But now we can do public override display description. Now it is a lock string, so you need the eco.shared.localization for it. So it will be a lock string. This is just using link, but don't worry about that. We're going to go get and return because we're overriding. And as localizer, helps if I can spell, dot do string or str, and just give it a description. And we need a semicolon there to finish off, and then we can end that there. So that's our description. Next thing we need to do is we just need to include a static, what our item is. So it's my item, and that's all we need for that. You can put other things, other parameters and stuff inside here, but we're not going to cover that today. But that's literally all you need to add an item into the game. It's very, very simple, very easy. But the next part we're going to cover is we're going to add a recipe so somebody can make our item. So we can either have it so it requires a skill, or we can have it so it can just be made whenever. But if we're going to be adding a skill, it's a type of, and then our skill name. So say logging skill, and close that off. And then after we've actually put in our skill, we can select a specific level. So you don't have to, but say we want them to have to be like level 4 to be able to use our skill. And then that's all we need to do there. So next, we're going to add another public partial class, and this is going to be our recipe. Now, all recipes now are under a recipe family. So there used to be just recipe before, but recipes only needed if you're doing variants, which I probably won't cover today. Just because like variants is just different costs of recipes. So it all comes under the same recipe, it's just different like cost items to actually make it. Alright, so now we need to define our recipe. So try and keep all your naming the same. It makes it so nothing's going to break on you later on, and everything's going to work a lot better for you. So we're going to go this dot initialize, And we're going to use the localizer here as well. So we're going to do string and we're going to do like whatever it is. So this is how it's going to display in a variant recipe as well, but it's safe to have it here to begin with. So we're going to add, just going to give it the name there, and then next we're going to add a reference to this recipe. So it will be my item recipe. Finish that off with a semicolon. Then next we're going to add the recipe. So this dot recipes equals new list recipe, and then another set of curly brackets. These curly brackets need to be closed off with a semicolon, but the rest of them don't. Alright, so this is the start of our recipe. So we're going to go new recipe. So we're making a new recipe. IntelliSense can be annoying sometimes. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give it a name. So just a default string. And now we're going to add a localized string as well. We're going to give it the same name. We're just going to keep everything the same. Now, next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new ingredient element array. So now this is where we start adding in the costs to actually make our items. So we're going to add a new ingredient element. And this is where we start adding in our items. So the game has some tags. There's a lot of tags that you can use. So if you want to use a generic item, so like say if you want it to be able to made with any kind of logs, we'll just add the tag wood, add a comma, and say how many we want them to use. And that's all you need to do for that. Or if you want to add multiple, we just add a comma at the end, and then add the new ingredient element again. And then we're going to say we want it to use not just wood, but we also want it to use, plant fibers specifically. So we're going to go with type of plant fibers item, comma, and then how many. So if you're using a tag, you can just go straight string. If you're using an item, it's a type of that item, and then the amount, and then you can add skill benefits and stuff, which we'll cover in a later date when we do like variant recipes and things like that. There is also an optional parameter as well. It's called static ingredients, so regardless of modules and stuff being added, we can add in true, makes it a static ingredient, which means regardless if they have modules or high skill values, it will always cost that amount to make it. So that's completely up to you whether or not that's something you want to do. And we finish that off with a comma. And then once that's done, we add our new crafting element. Now our crafting element is what is given once it's been made. And so at this point in time, we actually want to give out our item. So it'll be my item. And then we can just specify exactly how many we want it to give, or you leave it blank, it'll always give 1. But if you want it to give 5 for all their work, you can set that to 5. You can set it to 1, you don't need to set it to 1, 1 is default. Or you can set it to 1,000, however many you want. But we're just going to leave that default 1 for the time being. So that's our actual recipe done. Now we need to add a few optional parameters. Now this one is completely optional. You don't actually have to add this. This is labor. So the new labor system in 9.0 uses calories to do your work orders and stuff. You can add this if you don't want to. You can add this if you want. Otherwise, if you don't want to, you don't need to worry about this part. But if you do want to add it, I'm still going to show you how to do it. So we're going to create labor and calories value. And then we're going to say how many calories we want. Or how much labor. Sorry, labor is different to calories. And then we're going to add it to a skill. So say that this requires logging skill. We're going to say that you need to be of the logging skill user to be able to put calories into this work order or labor into this work order. We're going to reference our recipe. And then we're going to go this.ui link and finish that off with a semicolon. So this just adds in the cost, an additional cost to make your items. You don't. This is completely optional. You do not have to add labor and calories. So if you don't want to, you don't need to. Next is experience on craft is just an integer, so you can set how much experience they want to get. I haven't fully worked this part out myself because when I set it to like 20, it gave like 200. So I think it's an int times 10. So if you want them to get 10 XP, you'd give them you'd put that to 1. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add in craft time. So craft minutes, and we're going to go create craft time value. We are going to reference our recipe first. And then we're going to go item.get my item dot UI link. Now this part here is our time. So we're going to add, say, 7 minutes. That needs to be finished off with a semicolon. Now you can here as well, you can also add you need to add the skill as well, so like type of logging skill. But you can also add in, if they have them, like the focus speed talents or the parallel speed talents, so the timer is reduced based on those particular talents. But we don't need to do that today because we haven't actually added anything to it. The next thing we're going to do is this dot initialize. Localizer dot string my item, and it is the type of our recipe. Finish that off with a semicolon. Now this is where we add it into our tables for where we want to create our new item. So we're going to add recipe in a crafting component. And now this is where we reference the table. So it'll be type of. Now you've got to be real careful here because you've got, say we've got the tailoring table. So the tailoring table has got 2. So we have tailoring table item or tailoring table object. So that's the item, this is the object. So when you're referencing tables for crafting, you need to reference the object, not the item. Because otherwise it'll just throw an error and it won't work. But we're just going to add this to the workbench. So we're going to go workbench object, and then we're just going to end it with this. And that is our recipe done. So this will add our item's recipe into the workbench with our costs that we set up. So our wood, our plant fibers, how much of each, and the item that it's going to give when it's finished, which will be our basic item up here. So now that that's done, that can just go straight into the server, and your server should load up, and there's your first item. There is Unity stuff that we can do to add the icon to it, which we're going to cover later on in the video. But that is how to write your first item specifically. So I'm just going to cut it here, and then I'm going to come back, and then the next thing we're going to work on in our code file is adding our world object. So like we're just going to be using a default model that I whipped up today. It's just a table. It's a 2x1 table. It's just a basic model. Feel free to use it in any of your mods or just in testing. I would do whatever you want with it. I don't mind. I'm going to be providing a little bit of a texture with it as well. So we'll cover that later on in this video. Actually, we're probably going to add that to the next video. This has already gone on for 20 minutes. So we'll add that into the next video, which I'll have out hopefully with this one after the other. So until then, we're just going to leave this here. So that's just making your first item. That's covering everything. And then in the next video, we're going to cover making the objects and doing the Unity side. But for now, we'll finish up this video by adding in our world object, which is going to be pretty easy. It's not going to take too long. So we're going to come up to the top, and we're going to need to serialize this as well. Now there's a lot of different things that we can attach to our world objects, but we're just going to worry about some basic ones to begin with. Through experimentation, you'll find it. So we're going to call this my item object, and it's going to be a world object. Not a world object item, but a world object. And as we can see, like the namespace or type could not be found. We're obviously missing a reference, so we need to be using eco.gameplay.objects to be able to define our world object. Now I've had a few people ask me like about room requirements and things, but we're just going to cover a few components. So we're going to go require component, which means that this table needs this component to operate. So we're going to add a type of, we're going to go a property. Well, I should probably spell this properly. Auth component, which requires the gameplay.components.auth. Next attribute we're going to add is require component solid ground component, which means that this object needs to be placed on the ground. Otherwise, it won't let you place it on walls or anything like that. So we add the solid ground component, so it has to be placed on the ground. It can't be placed in water or anything like that. And now there is another one we can add. It's require component, and then this one is a room requirements component. Now this has got a couple of additional little things to it, and so we'll just run over them real quick. So we have the require room containment, which means it needs to be inside a fully built room. And then we can add the require room volume, and then this adds an int, so how big the room has to be for this thing to work. Now this is usually only used on tables, like crafting tables and stuff like that, so you don't really need to worry about it on the object we're going to do today, but this will be handy if you're trying to do tables. So this needs, say, like 25 square meters in the room. And then we can add one more, which is require room material tier. Now this has got a couple of optional parameters to it. The first one we're gonna do is the room tier that it needs. So this will be it needs to be at least a tier 1 room for it to work. Now as I said, this stuff here is usually for work tables, workbenches. So the require room material tier would probably be used on like a crafting bench that you might make. So you know you need it to be inside a house. The room's got to have this much room in it, and it has to be made from at least this tier. You can also then add onto it like talents. So if you have your object linked to a specific profession, like say like tailoring or something, you can add the bonuses to the tailoring lavish requirement talent or tailoring frugal requirement talent, which will lower or raise the room material cost automatically. You don't need to do anything there, but we're not going to actually be using the room requirements component except for the room containment, just so it's like you know you need to be in a room. All right, so here inside of our world object, we can override our lock string display name. So remember how I said in my items that we couldn't actually override our display name? It had to be a lock display name up in it as an attribute. Well, it's not like that in the world objects, and that can be really, really, really confusing. But so this can also use like I represents item type, but don't worry about that. That's not something we're going to cover today. But we're going to just override the display name, and it's going to be the same as our display description down the bottom. So it'll be get return localizer, do string again, and we're going to call this my table. No, we're going to stick with my item because we're not worrying about the table stuff today. And we can finish that off there. So next we're going to add another override. And that is initialize. So this is the initialized state. I hope I spelled that correctly. Don't worry about this little error, we'll worry about that later. It'll fix itself up as we go through our code. So now we're going to do another static, and that'll be my item object this time. And then we're going to do one more public override. Void. And this one will be destroy. And so we're just going to leave base.override destroy. So the other thing I was telling you about was I represents item, which needs another little parameter, which, yeah, we'll just add it in. So we got public virtual type, and then it's represented item type, get return type of, and then we're going to reference our item that we made earlier and finish that off. Now, type and namespace type could not be found, so we're missing a directive which we need system for, so system's got to be included. Sorry, I was wrong with this one. This one is a protected override void, not public. Now, because this has got nothing in it, we can just leave the code lines like this, keeps them clean, no unnecessary spaces. Now, in our static my item object, this is where we can add occupancy. So this just states that, hey, look, this is our block, or this is our object, and it's taking up this specific room. Now, I'm not going to worry about that because we are on 30 minutes on this video, and this is probably one of the longest ones I've done yet. And this will just pretty much we'll probably cover this in the next video, which will cover the Unity stuff. Alright, well, thank you for watching this video, and I hope you stay tuned for the next one. I hope I covered a lot of the stuff that you were interested about today. And once again, if you're compiling your DLL, you can just click up here, right click, click build, and it'll compile all this into your DLL. And you can just put it straight into your server, and it should boot without any problems. And if you have any errors when you go to build, down the bottom here after its build is finished, it'll tell you whether it's failed or it's succeeded. Now you'll notice here in our error list we have 38 warnings. Found conflicts between different versions. We don't really need to worry about that. That's not something we're going to waste a lot of our time trying to do when we're just trying to create basic items. So this is our first item done, and now we've gone and added the world object class to it. Now that we've gone and added that, we're actually going to quickly change our item now. So our item is no longer just a straight item. It's now actually a world object item. And we have to reference the world object that it is, and it will be my item object. So this just links our item to our object. So when the item is given to us in game, it'll be in our inventory or a toolbar, and it'll be represented as the item. But when that item is placed down on the ground, it will interact and become our world object. It's just the communication. So that's what we're going to finish on today. And tomorrow I'm going to show you the Unity side of getting all the Unity stuff set up, all your icons, adding your objects, and getting everything in game and making sure it's all working. And so yeah, I will see you tomorrow.